Fellow travellers on the road of life, every day is a learning experience. Now, we're about to conduct the card vote, and I've been coming to conference for 12 years, and it's never happened. We will be having, I guess, whatever the result is under our democracy, half of us may or may not be happy. We'll have to deal with that. It's a human thing. Do remember that you can always bring another motion back at the next conference. This is a small tweak. You can come back with a motion at our next policy conference and reverse it, whichever way it happens to go, or put in a new policy. That's part of what we do. Just one thing, I just want to clarify something here. If you remember, just before we had a break, the normal thing to do would be to lock the doors and conduct the vote. Now, because a lot of people were perhaps unprepared, we took the decision to break at lunch. I asked the conference if you were happy with that, and we had no objections from the floor, so that's what we proceeded to do. Now, what's gone on over lunch? I imagine people have been talking and discussing and trying to work out what they're going to do. So, we are now going to move to the card vote. Is there anything else I need to say, Magnus? Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, so just to be clear, this is a card vote in 4 stages. So, first of all, we will ask those of you who have a card vote to vote with from your branch. We will ask for a yes. Hold your card up. We will come round. We will verify that you're the person to have that card vote, and we will take that card from you, and we will put that in the yes pile. Then the President will ask you to put your hand down, and will ask for the no vote, and similarly hold your branch card up. The activity going on down the front is that we need to do that in a further 3 stages, which is that under the card vote, each National Executive member gets 1 vote in this by way of card. So we will distribute those cards in a moment to the National Executive members, and then we will ask National Executive members to hold up their cards for yes and for no. We will then give delegates out who are regional secretaries and regional treasurers. They have an additional 1 vote as regional representatives, and we will go through the yes, no. And then if there are any past presidents in the hall, can you make yourself known?
Judy over
Great.
there.
Okay, so, and the past presidents also get one vote on this question as well. So it's a bit of a thing. As Paul said, we haven't done this before, so we'll just move through those 4 stages, and then Paula and I will go away and count the votes. The business of conference will continue, and then we'll come back at a suitable time and declare the final result.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just to clarify that, we will be, after we've taken the votes, Magnus will, and staff will go out to count them, and we'll continue with motions 11 to 14 and motion 4 from yesterday as well. Sorry, Paul. Right, and just remind people that you can't cast a vote on behalf of an absent branch. So if you have a card for a branch who are not represented, that can't be cast. But we'll be checking that, I think, with the people that are here. So, buckle up for a lesson in democracy and governance. Okay, so I think I ask now then for those branches who are in favour of this motion to please raise their cards now.
decision doing it in that order, then it tell you. Yeah, exactly.
Just be another few seconds on that one. Yeah, someone's working their way.
But touch of flaps.
After this. Yeah, it's after this. And then after that. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just checking there. Is there any vote for that has not yet been collected? Please probably stand up and wave. And okay. Are we happy to move to the second phase? Okay, could you now raise your votes, those branches who are voting against this motion, please? I haven't, no. And national and then regional. Past president, yeah. Right, okay. Okay, can I just check, is there any branch that hasn't had their votes against collected? If you can make yourself known to the tellers. Thank you. So it will be the turn of National Executive next. And I'll remind you, this was a motion from National Executive. Okay. That might take a few minutes. Sarah's still doing that. So Sarah's up, yeah. There should be no votes against our National Executive.
It shouldn't if it's a national executive motion, isn't it?
This is, yeah. This is the only thing where the electoral party.
It would have worked, yeah.
Because I remember when
You get your votes, yeah.
you had your votes logged on, so
Yeah.
the wrong person couldn't get it.
And they shared, yeah, you had 50-50, the two of you. Did you not?
Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you, Magnus.
Okay, I'm hoping now that all the National Executive members in the room have got their voting card, which looks like that. Okay. can I ask national executive members to raise your card if you are voting for this motion? Oh, I beg your pardon.
When are we doing the emergency motion?
We okay to collect national exec? National executive, if you vote for, please raise your cards now. You should have them. Sorry, under control.
No, it's the. I'm just working out when we're doing the emergency motions because the whole is responding to what's happened like that.
Yes,
And I want to get my head around that
well,
before you take that motion.
that's fine. I'm not taking it until later.
Okay, that's fine.
So I'm doing motions.
So when we're done here, I'm going to run out and get my head around that.
If we get that session,
Yeah, okay.
I will wait for you. Yeah. Hopefully, while we're doing that, also regional secretaries, is it? Regional officials and regional treasurers have got their cards, and past presidents have got their cards. So can I have collect the cards for any national executive members voting against this motion, please? Can you raise your hand? Thank you. Regional secretaries and treasurers, you can have your vote now. If you are voting for this motion, can you please raise your card?
Can you just check they've all got one?
Has everyone got a card, regional treasurer? You got your hand up. Okay, we've got a missing card over there. Thank you. Have we got another regional 4 over there?
Some more down there.
Mark? Mark. Okay. You okay, tell us if I ask now for regional secretaries or treasurers voting against this motion? Can you raise your cards? Thank you. Hold them nice and high. Okay. So now it's the turn of past presidents. Past presidents who are for this motion, could you raise your card? Over there. Yeah. We'll get you a card, Andy.
I didn't mean it to come out rudely. I hope he didn't. Where are you? 4 of
Great.
us gone present.
We are, and now, past presidents. Have we got any past presidents who are against that motion? Is there anyone who feels they've been disenfranchised? Okay. Now, what the process is, Magnus and his team will take those away, and we'll find out the vote result later on, whether it was Toy Story or whether it was one of those other Pixar movies that got the Friday afternoon end of term vote. A bit more serious than that, but as I pointed out at the start, you know, this is democracy, and as we know too well, you're not always happy with the result. So we will now continue our debating session by moving on to motion 11, which is the additional learning needs reform. For those of you not involved in this, in Wales they've introduced this new role of ALN, which, as you'll probably hear, has caused some issues for us. And the proposer is Tim Newbold. Thank you, Tim.
Prynawn da Cynhadledd, good afternoon, conference. I'm sure everyone here is passionately concerned about the needs of children and the varying needs and the challenges that we as schools have to face in meeting those needs. One thing that's really important to me is that we don't allow COVID to rewrite history. Because COVID has certainly made a lot of things worse in terms of children's mental health and their social skills and communication skills. But as I see it, those things, social communication skills and mental health, were in free fall for 4 or 5 years before the first lockdown. In Wales, we have a few different terminologies. We talk about additional learning needs, or ALN, rather than SEND, and instead of SENCOs, we have ALENCOs, which are additional learning needs coordinators. The ALN and Education Tribunal, and that's a bit of a scary phrase, Act, became law in Wales in September last year. Now, it's dumped a huge amount of work on schools. A lot of local authority responsibilities have been handed down to schools. For example, a 26-week statementing process that local authorities used to have to do has now to be done by schools in not 26 weeks, but 7 weeks. The pressure on schools in Wales as a result of this form is enormous, and especially on the additional learning needs coordinators themselves. Civil servants in Cardiff seem to have convinced the previous Education Secretary and the current Education Secretary that this reform is cost neutral, a view which I hope you'll agree is simply fatuous. There is the workload for the ANCOs at the moment, or the ALENCOs, which is just enormous. Many are trying to get out of the job and go to another job in education which doesn't involve being a coordinator. Some are trying to get out of education altogether. In my school, we did a little time audit last term to see how our additional learning needs coordinator could manage all her work, and the paperwork principally, in school time. And she could, if she gave up a 40% teaching commitment, toilet breaks, lunches, and any other conversation with any other members of staff, she would just about have to do it be able to do it in school time. Cost neutral, say the civil servants. Well, how do you do extra work for no extra money? And we know what that is. It's evenings, weekends, holidays that ALENCOs are having to work to get all this through. In small schools, as you will all be aware, as well as I am, you've got a head teacher who may have a teaching commitment, maybe coordinating 3 or 4 subjects, has minimal admin support, but is also the ALENCO, having to deal with all this paperwork as well. We've got ALENCOs going off sick, which means the job has to be picked up by deputy assistant head teacher, our members having to pick up this extra workload. Welsh Government doesn't get funding issue It seems to think that all we're talking about is the rate of pay for the elenco. And when NAHT Cymru met the Welsh Minister back in March, he said he was working on some grant funding to help us to implement the changes. Well, we're already into the financial year trying to do it with no money at all. So, colleagues, what we're asking you to support us with is a review of funding in Wales for the ALNet bill, as we're calling it, to make sure that schools have got enough time available, enough money to release people to do the job and to provide the resources that are needed. And we're also calling for a review of the workload issue to keep elencos in the job and healthy and safe, given the amount of work they have to do. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd am gwrando. Tegwch ein cynnig os gwelwch yn dda. Thank you very much for listening, and please support our motion.
Diolch. Is there anybody else wishing to speak on this motion? No? I'm almost frightened to ask. Okay. Those who are in favour of this motion, can you please raise your hand? Thank you very much. And those against? That's unanimously carried. Thank you. Takes us on to motion 12. I'm just waiting to appear. So it's funding in Wales. And it looks like Dean is coming to speak on that behalf. Can I see the second slide?
Hello, Dean Taylor, Newport branch, on behalf of NHT Cymru. I don't know about you, in my 23 plus years of headship now, when it comes to that time of the year, when you have to plan your budget, you start to get a small level, if not a high level of anxiety about what it is that responsibility will place upon you. And every year, I've come to conference probably for the vast majority of those times, and we've debated funding. While this motion is around Wales, it's obviously applicable to every nation in the UK, and I would ask you to support this motion. We have seen significant, particularly in Wales, investment of post-COVID grants come into schools, but that really hides the funding crisis that still exists, because funding in Wales is still at the levels as it was in 2009, and there's been no growth around that time. And I don't know about you, but I know I'm getting older, and I know I'm getting grumpier, but I begin to think that, you know, what is it? When will politicians listen? That we've talked about crisis in children's mental health, we've talked about safeguarding issues, we've talked about a lack of investment, and colleagues have talked about the austerity that's really brought our public services to the ground over the last 12 years. Yet if they invest, many of these problems would go away, and many of these problems would be resolved. And we're asking for fair funding for every nation of the UK, but particularly in Wales. We're asking Welsh Government to stop playing politics and to stop funding particular grant-based issues or things that lend themselves to political expediency and party political politics at the time, and focus on our core budgets and fund this well enough to make sure that our children that we get up to do our very best for every day get the things they need. Like you, I worry when I can't get an education psychologist to come and see a child. I worry when a social worker doesn't appear because of lack of funding. I worry about all the things that should be there at the core centre of what we provide. So we're asking Welsh Government to make sure that funding in Wales is equitable, that a child in Wrexham has the same funding as a child in Newport, and that it's fully funded and fairly funded. And I'm sure that would be the same in Liverpool, in London, in Belfast, that a child anywhere in the UK has that opportunity to have access to resources. We're also asking for Welsh Government to look at all the nonsense in the system. We've talked about the middle tier. What is it that we're spending money on that we don't need to spend money on? Yes, we need to make sure that we have a growth in the amount of money that's funded from education centrally, but we also need to look at the systems that we currently have. get rid of the waste that's in the system, the duplication, and focus the money in schools with staffing and resources and those support services that make a difference to our children's lives. So we're asking you that you would support this motion, and that particularly in Wales, but also across all the UK, children get the funding they deserve. Conference, I move.
Thank you, Dean. We have somebody else approaching the 2-minute mic.
I'm not as old as Dean, so I could step up over the stage there. But we do. Our colleagues in Northern Ireland do support our colleagues in Wales. We are older and grumpier as well. We are waiting on a common funding formula review ever taking place. But obviously, all these things apply, I'm sure, in every region. But we would like to stand in support of that.
Thank you very much. Anybody else waiting to speak? Okay, in which case we'll take this motion to a vote. So if you're in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. And those against? Thank you. That's carried unanimously, which will take us on to motion 13, which is small and rural schools. Proposer Dean Taylor, seconder Julie Kelly. Oh, Dean, sorry. What did I say?
Good afternoon, colleagues. Yeah, Damon McGarvey, not Dean Taylor.
Sorry.
I'm very proud to support this motion. As a former head of a small and rural school with just 28 pupils, they were some of the most rewarding years of my career. I'm representing some very courageous, committed and innovative colleagues. Whilst I'm speaking on behalf of Pembrokeshire, the issues resonate with members right across our entire union. Up until the end of the last financial year, colleagues in Wales and small and rural schools benefited from a grant which was to encourage innovation and support school-to-school working. £2.5 million per year to support this network. Not a vast sum given the number of schools involved, but vital to the fabulous work that those colleagues do. Our Welsh Government now saying that those schools no longer need to be innovative, no longer need to work school to school. We'd hope not, but the grant has been stopped, and those school leaders feel like they're being set up to fail. Put in context, Welsh Government have recently spent £10 million on a pilot involving 14 schools to lengthen the school day. 14 schools. They wanted 20, they couldn't get enough to sign up. I wonder why. Don't get me wrong, those colleagues I'm talking about are not complaining about their roles. They are rightly proud of their schools and the communities they serve. They simply want to be able to give their pupils the very best possible learning experiences. There's many challenges of being a leader of a small school. The expectation of workload is the same as for non-teaching heads with SLTs. The work-life balance is impossible to maintain. Teaching commitment is often high, often 0.8. During the pandemic, often full-time. Staff absence means the head teacher is often the breakfast club supervisor, the lunchtime supervisor, the cleaner, the caretaker, as well as being a teacher and a head teacher. And the pay gap is closing. So there's no financial incentive for people to take on the role. Admin support is limited. Often the head is also the Elenco or the Senko, and as we've just heard from Tim, that's a big job in itself, and those members of staff are struggling too. And due to the rural nature of the schools, sometimes difficult to attract staff. And of course, there is always the constant concern that those schools will be closed. Doesn't make for the best of working and learning environments. And yet, these colleagues do not complain. As we all know, as school leaders, in the face of adversity, we find solutions. We make it work. In Pembrokeshire, several of these small school leaders have been held up as examples of best practice. They support each other with management issues, improving leadership, work scrutiny, observation, strategic planning, school-to-school support for all staff and their governors. They share their budgets so they can get external providers to provide training. They couldn't do that on their own. They build capacity in-house in terms of ALN transformation and leadership, while the staff take on big roles across the network of schools. And individual head teachers are being asked to support other schools in driving improvement. There's many other examples. These are solutions, but at what cost? These schools have made incredible use of this grant, including, as you would expect, sharing their work free of charge so that other schools can benefit. The small and rural grants schools grant has already been removed. These school leaders are balancing their efforts between taking on additional roles just to keep their schools open, sometimes teaching full-time, and then spending their evenings cleaning their schools and catching up on their leadership responsibilities. They're not asking for special treatment, they're asking for fair treatment. Funding which they were given has been taken away. Funding which will allow them the flexibility to be able to ensure their schools run smoothly, their children get the opportunities they deserve, and let's face it, to do so whilst having a work-life balance so we don't lose more of our valued colleagues due to workload pressures. Surely they are worth that investment from our governments. Colleagues, I ask for your support and the support of National Executive to continue to campaign for sustainable funding for all small and rural schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
So Julie Kelly, Hampshire, all things small schools. So obviously supporting this motion for Wales. Just to say that, I've been warning for 10 years about the vulnerability of small schools. It's now tipping dangerously into critical point, and we're starting to see Hampshire small schools starting to close down, and we know if they go into RI as well, they've had it. And the final nail in the coffin is the white paper and the arbitrary 2030 date. For becoming parts of MATs, but they may not be able to be seen as economically viable. In England, we have sparsity funding, but not all small schools are liable to have that. And if you close them down and lose them from the heart of the community, and there's also the fact that children will be bused and taxied in from miles and miles away. I'm working with the NHT at the moment, as well as the National Association of Small Schools, and we have relooked at a questionnaire that went out in 2019 about small and rural schools. That will be going out again in the week beginning the 16th of May, and we would really like some feedback as well. So as well as this happening in Wales, it's happening across all the nations, and we're at risk of losing the small schools. We have here the heart for compassion, the heart for humanity, and the heart for the 125 years NHT has been education. These schools are at the heart of their communities and will be a huge loss. I support this.
Thank you, Julie. 2-minute mic speakers. Clem.
Clem Cody, Cumbria. I really support this motion. I am a small school head, and what a lot of people don't realise is there's an increased running costs to a small school. Despite paying the same business rates as a school down the road, we don't have access to main sewerage, as one example. And returning to school when we could and open school fully, we had a small problem with our sewage plant. The pump had stopped working. And more crucially, the holding tank was becoming really, really full before it got to the sewage plant. We got the people out, diverting money from the public sector into the private sector, and we had them had a look at it. They said it was going to take 3 weeks to fix because they needed a new part, so we had options. Option 1, close the school because we had no amenities. Option 2, keep our fingers crossed we didn't get little brown submarines popping up out of all the drains. Or option 3, pay for a very kind gentleman to come every 2 days and manually pump our sewage so we could keep the school open. This cost us just short of £3,000 to keep our school open, diverting much needed funds from the classroom into the day-to-day functioning and opening of the school. And I often hear from local MPs to Cumbria that some small schools aren't financially viable and we should just close these schools. But what those politicians fail to understand is, for some villages, that would mean a 2-hour bus journey for 4-year-old children. So that isn't really an option unless you invest into an adequate transport system equitable to London across a rural landscape. It's just not viable. So schools must stay open and schools must be funded for that. The other thing I wanted to mention is many of our small school heads in Cumbria have a teaching commitment of 80 to 90% because the budgets aren't viable for them to have dedicated non-contact time. But this can often mean them missing out on valuable meetings for SEND and for safeguarding meetings where they often have to catch up on the minutes and then agonise over the decisions. Small and rural schools are the lifeblood of our community, and we must do everything we can to protect them. Thank you.
Thank you, Clem.
Hello, Conference. I'm Gary Tucker from Somerset, and this is my first time at Conference. I'm speaking in support of this motion. I'm the head of a small rural school in the southwest of England and fully understand and am experiencing the challenges that are so acute in small schools. Being a teaching head, it can be really challenging to lead, drive up standards while simultaneously teaching about teeth hygiene at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, as well as providing cover for colleagues when supply agencies can't find anyone to cover, too remote apparently. Small schools are always under threat of not being economically viable due to declining pupil numbers, a lack of affordable housing, and the fact that we have an increasingly ageing population in these communities with families not able to join us just makes this more inevitable. Some would argue this is market forces, and if small schools aren't viable, then they should cease to exist. I simply do not agree with that. Small schools are a huge part of our culture and our heritage. In fact, they are part of our future. Yesterday, President Paul described the national scandal of the mental health crisis. This was coming pre-pandemic and is now amplified for all to see, made worse by the cost of living crisis and COVID. Conference, small rural schools have a massive part to play in reversing this, with our access to the great outdoors, access to animals for therapeutic interventions, and access to spaces for children to co-regulate with emotionally available adults. MATs, local authorities and families of schools are underusing what could be a huge tool in overcoming the trauma that we've all experienced. And of course, sustaining small schools in whatever way requires another look at funding. I'm not saying that all small schools should follow this path, but we could at least have the option to do this and think a bit more creatively. Conference, I urge you to wholeheartedly endorse this motion, give small and rural schools the funding they need for their futures and for them to play their part in what lies ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Keith Wright, North West Region, National Executive Member. My first two headships were in the lovely rural county of Norfolk, and the three schools I worked with, the first one was a single small school primary in a village, and the second headship was a federation of two small primary schools. So the context then, I don't think I could do the job now as I could then because of the demands, but there was teaching commitment, there was that need, and on day one of my second headship, the kitchen flooded, and I thought, what do I do? But there was people around to help. But what struck me was, although there were few children, you were very valued as part of the community. You were the community. In many cases, you were the hub. It's the only time where the parents could meet and talk in a small village, in the middle of nowhere, possibly no shop or maybe one pub, but you felt valued as that member. And the idea of the schools being starved now, each week there's a story in the paper of a school closing because it's not financially viable. And where I live now in South Lakes of Cumbria, there's schools there that are starving because there's people buying second homes for holiday lets and then denying the village of another family, possibly. So heads of those schools need our help and our support. And as a head of a big school now, I remember well what it's like working hard in a small primary. So do support this and lobby your MPs to improve transport links to get them better for those communities so that more people want to live there and stay there, not just be there on a holiday. I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
Graham Frost, Cumbria branch. Just very, very brief to say that quite often we hear about cost effectiveness, don't we, on so many things. And the key here with small and rural schools is to, as we've heard, recognise the value that they contribute more widely than a very simple spreadsheet assessment of their cost of running. We have to factor in all our conversations about small and rural schools, the cost effectiveness in a broader sense, the cost effectiveness in the long term for the communities and the sustainability of communities. So I wholeheartedly endorse this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. I see nobody else waiting to speak, so we'll go to the vote. Could you, those in favour, would you raise your hand, please? Thank you very much. And those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Conference. So we move on to motion 14, which is curriculum reform in Wales. And that looks like it's being proposed by Karina. Yes, and Dean Taylor. Thanks, Karina.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope I do this justice, because originally this was motioned by another colleague who's a secondary colleague, so I will try and speak to it as best I can. Two parts to this. We've heard this morning some really passionate voices around how hard it's been over the last 3 years just dealing with school. It's been hard in Wales as well. We've had a pandemic. On top of that, though, we are going through some radical reform, and it's everything. So there's nothing in our education system that is staying the same in Wales. And the pressure that that is putting on our school leaders and our teachers is enormous. We've had no concession from Welsh Government at all, apart from to say, a very vague little concession from them, to say that September 2022, when our new curriculum comes into force, it's the start of the journey. Now, we have no idea what that means. So I really feel, as you know, I'm not, wouldn't say I'm a massively experienced head teacher, but I really feel for our very young head teachers coming into the profession who've gone in to take a school on in the middle of a pandemic. They've dealt with that. They've dealt with trying to get a new curriculum together, and it's no mean feat. I'll talk about the curriculum in just a second. But there's also our accountability system that's all come back up and running. To have an idea of what it means to be on the journey of your new curriculum in September 2022, when none of us actually know what that looks like or what that means, is really difficult. So one of the things we're asking for is really to consider and have some really clear pictures about what the expectations are from our accountability partners in Wales. The second part, if I just give I was really interesting listening to the Shadow Minister this morning, and she said, we want a curriculum, talk about England, that inspires and supports. She said it lives the family's experiences. And that's what our curriculum, if we get it right in Wales, that's what it aims to do. It's a really exciting time, but on top of everything else we're doing, it's a really difficult time. So if I give an example of something that we're looking at as we've been exploring our curriculum in our school, we were considering this is one of our themes: journeys lead to challenges, risks and opportunities. It was going to be one of our themes. It's a really broad experience. We were going to think about migration, refugees, conflict, families, histories, causation. It encompasses compassion, humanity. We're looking at a whole broad spectrum of curriculum. The disconnect we have is when we get to secondary schools. Our secondary schools are looking at curriculum, but they're also thinking about qualifications. We haven't had any movement in our qualifications yet. Our secondary schools are sitting there thinking we still need to get our children through the qualification system, the exams, but we really don't know what our curriculum is going to look like. There's quite a disconnect there. And it's a bit like the chicken and the egg, because Welsh Government are telling us the curriculum comes first, we'll get the exam system right afterwards. But for secondary school leaders, they really need that picture of what curriculum and examinations are going to look like before they can develop their curriculum in their schools. And they don't want to disadvantage the young people in Wales. There's quite a concern, and I've talked to a head teacher actually, whose own children are coming up to go into secondary school, who's seriously considering driving them 40 minutes across the border into England, because he's so concerned about what qualifications will look like in Wales, and he doesn't want to disadvantage his own children. So it is a real concern, and we really need Welsh Government to start looking at what qualifications will look like. We do want that focus on skills. We don't want it to be all academic. We think it's really important that that's got right, and it does reflect the curriculum that we've got. We've really got to be careful that we don't disadvantage our young people, meaning that they can't go and study elsewhere in the world. Thank you. Conference, I move.
Thank you, Karina. So do we have anyone else wish to speak on this? Okay, we'll go to vote. Could you raise your hand if you are for this motion? Thank you. And Would you raise your hand if you are against? Thank you. That concludes motions 11 to 14. I'll tell you what's going to happen now. I'll give you the result of motion 10. And then after that, we'll take motion 4, which was the Ofsted motion from yesterday. We will probably then, in the debating time we've got, finish the scheduled motions 15 and 16. And then it depends where we are up to the break. And then we may take the emergency motions either before the break, if we've got time, or at the session at 4:15 to 4:45. Okay. Right, so I have the result of motion 10. So do you want to put that up on the screen? That was the motion we discussed earlier. The total number of votes cast were 18,179. The votes for were 7,337. The votes against were 10,842. So that motion has been defeated by a majority of 3,505 votes. Thank you. Thank you, conference. Okay, so now we're going to move to back to motion 4 from yesterday. So thank you very much. Alistair? Alistair. Alistair. All right, okay. Alistair Black and Belle Collins, thank you for stepping in and picking up this motion at short notice, and I'm standing in your room and writing it up last night, probably, were you?
That's the one. So,
okay.
Effectively, I wasn't going to speak today. I lost my voice last year, and it's never quite come back, so please bear with me if it goes a little bit thin. But I felt strongly enough about this that I thought I should take on the motion. So when there was nobody available from the North Tyneside branch to propose motion for yesterday about the Ofsted inspections, I thought it would be a shame if the motion just disappeared, even though it doesn't directly affect me or my school. What's COVID? Did we have a crisis? It's business as usual. At my school, we've had more staff and pupils off due to COVID this year than any other time. Since March the 23rd, 2020, we've done no more or less than any of the rest of you will have done. At one point, we even had the children and staff from the school next door for a term because they had nobody available to open their school. Fortunately for us, we last did Ofsted in July 2019, and it was okay. So I'm not expecting them back until maybe 2023 or 2024. According to recent announcements, it will definitely be by 2025, presuming they catch up with the backlog and do all the other schools that are on the waiting list. This academic year, I told all the staff that they were just to focus on the children being back at school and on looking after them. I've not introduced any new initiatives, and we're actually going to have a complete year of the new curriculum which we introduced in September 2019. I wanted to avoid putting any pressure on the staff or pupils and just give them the time and space to enjoy being back in school. We've discussed recently the number of pupils at, or more significantly, not at ARE, but I've still not put any pressure on them to ruthlessly try to close any gaps. Teachers, being teachers, have put themselves under some pressure, and I've had to remind them that our current Year 6 lasted a full year when they were in Year 3, and the current Year 3's last full year was when they were in reception. We're situated in Wood End, in the northeast of Coventry, which is significantly disadvantaged, and we've got a high proportion of pupil premium children. Very little, if any, learning took place outside the classroom during the lockdowns, so the vast majority of the children, particularly the younger ones, made little or no academic progress during the lockdowns. I'm not sure that I would have had the confidence to go with such an approach if we were expecting Ofsted this academic year. I'm fortunate that the governors are behind me, but they too might have a different approach if Ofsted were about to pop in for a wee chat. I always forward the STA assessment updates to any year groups that they might apply to. Last week's one went to Year 1, Year 2, Year 4 and Year 6. And these staff are now under the additional pressure of external tests, which of course nobody's going to look at. And I can only imagine the extra stress they would be feeling if we had Ofsted due any day now. In the last 2 weeks, 2 of my staff have made use of the Education Support Helpline. One is now off for at least a month due to stress. How many more might be in this position if we were awaiting Ofsted? I can only imagine how I would feel if we were an RI school who were due an inspection at the moment, with all the potential implications of a second RI judgment. And this morning, Bridget Phillipson referred to some outcomes being potentially career-ending, and she's absolutely right. Several local schools have been inspected this academic year, and there has barely been a mention of COVID, the pandemic, or any of the problems it's caused. If inspections were focused on what we've done to support our children, families, and staff during the pandemic, then we would all be graded as outstanding. But sadly, it's business as usual for them. Just before Easter, 1 in 17 of the population of England had COVID. Currently, I've no idea how many people have got COVID, and I doubt the government do either. I'm pretty certain that it hasn't disappeared, though. Yet, Ofsted appear to have the opinion, and they're back to business as usual. A long time ago, I used to enjoy the amusing and often tragic events that occurred to a certain Edmund Blackadder when Blackadder was on the television. The programme finished many years ago with a series based in World War I. But if the scriptwriters were to bring it back to the present day, with Edmund as a head teacher and Baldrick as his deputy, an episode about an inspection during a pandemic would make for an amusing watch. Viewers would think that surely this wouldn't be a business-as-usual inspection, and they would think it would be ridiculous. But sadly, that is what's happening. So, Ofsted, please give us a break and a chance to get back to normal. Conference, I move.
Thank you, Alistair. People for the 2-minute mic. I think I have Emily first.
Emily Prophet, Staffordshire Branch and National Executive. I'm fully in support of this motion, surprise, surprise. I am that head teacher that was inspected not only in the middle of the pandemic, 2 weeks prior to Christmas, but also Christmas, which just added to the chaos. The week prior to our inspection, we'd received an Ofsted complaint from a parent, which was unjust. And also I had probably half of my members of staff off sick, either in hospital for operations for other reasons or with COVID. The immense pressure that myself and my leadership team were put under during that inspection, I just simply cannot explain. It was tremendous. Thankfully, we did okay. Following that, the impact on my team was far greater. Although we've got a result that we wanted and that we rightly deserved, pandemic or no pandemic, over the Christmas period, my entire senior leadership team went down with COVID. And I can only say that that is because of the strain that we were all under. Our emotional stress, our stress levels put so much pressure on us that our immunity was that weak that we couldn't cope any longer. That meant that into January, we saw further cases of COVID and further impact on our schools. And I truly believe that the impact on my team over Christmas was purely because of the inspection that we received. I haven't got any evidence to back that up, but that's my belief. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Next person, keep coming.
Hello, I'm Ros Sendoric from Windsor and Maidenhead. And on behalf of Windsor and Maidenhead, I'd like to say we do like the word demand in this motion, which we fully support. I don't know whether many people here watch the Sky News channel, but if you do, you will have been aware that Beth Rigby, who is one of their reporters, has started doing in-depth interviews with certain people on a Thursday evening. And last Thursday it was Amanda Spielman. So I can tell you how our Chief of Ofsted is planning to make things better for us all. She recognises that heads and teachers are weary. They've been working so hard with really tired people, and the children have struggled. So Ofsted has got a 5-year plan, and this is it. There are 3 prongs to it. Firstly, there will be more inspections, because we need more inspections, because it will be helpful to us to have our wrongs pointed out to us. Secondly, we need more research. Now, I am a researcher. I did my doctorate while I was a serving head teacher at the Institute of Education, and I know what research actually looks like. And I know that the way in which inspectors come into schools and make value judgments in 5 minutes in a classroom is not research. But I've also worked with professional researchers, and I know how Ofsted's outcomes are being used by professional researchers as actual research. But I could give them some very good stories, and I used to, I can tell you, as an example of why this is not research. But while we're basing our value judgments on these very brief snapshots by people who are not always very reliable, this is what Ofsted is going to use its research on. And as a result of its research, its third prong will be more intervention, and that will be helpful to us. Now, if you don't have nightmares, go into Google and Google Beth Rigby, Amanda Spielman, and you can watch the whole 20-minute interview. But I would like to say on behalf of all of us here that we need to strongly support this motion, and we need to ask the National Executive to extend that to demand of Amanda Spielman that we know more about her plans.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to make the speakers aware, I will be using the bell after 2 minutes now. I'm going to be strict now, just so we can get through a variety of speakers. Thank you, Graham.
Okay. Graham Frost, Cumbria Branch National Executive. Now, while I wholeheartedly support the sentiment of this motion, I can't support the wording. The reason for that is because I represent members who have put a lot of time and effort into preparing and are in a position where they say, Ofsted, just come along, let's have an inspection and let's move on beyond it. So I wouldn't want to stop them from having that opportunity. But equally, I do also represent members who have an absolute dread of Ofsted, and I think there's a wider issue which we are as an association attending to. So therefore, I would like to propose a friendly amendment whereby we would, instead of saying, we would say conference calls on National Executive to ensure or to demand that Ofsted takes full account of the effects and impacts of the COVID pandemic in every inspection. I know that we're already pushing on that, but I think we could do with emphasising that. We could also have within that the support which we already emphasise, whereby a school that says we are absolutely overrun with COVID cases and therefore we would request a postponement of inspection should be continued as a policy position. I would support that if it was changed.
Okay. We're asking if that's a friendly amendment, Alistair. Are you happy with that? Okay.
Okay. So we have a debate on the amendment.
Do we want to debate on the amendment now then?
So if it's not a friendly amendment, we throw it open to conference and it's a debate on the amendment.
Right. If it's not a friendly amendment, we throw the debate over to conference.
On the amendment.
On the amendment.
We need Graham to come back and be clear what the amendment is.
Yeah, Graham, if we're going to do that, we need to be clear on what the amendment actually is.
Do you want me to come back?
Yeah.
Okay. Forgetting it's here as well, I'm looking up there. So conference calls on National Executive to demand that every Ofsted inspection takes full account of the impact and effects of the pandemic on the school they are inspecting. And that schools which are not in a position to be inspected because of the effects of the pandemic should be able to postpone.
Have we got a seconder for that?
I'll second that.
We have a seconder for that. Just shout your name.
Michael Tidd.
Michael Tidd. We are consulting the flowchart. So, at this point, so now, if you're waiting to speak, we will now want speakers on to debate the amendment if it's unfriendly. So, if anyone in that queue wants to support Graham's change, you can still stay if you want to speak on the main thing, but we have to deal with the amendment first. So maybe if the seconder we want to speak. And then we'll have a vote on the amendment, and then we'll go back to the...
So Michael Tidd, West Sussex. I think it's a politics thing. If we send this back and go back to DfE with this, it will be put in that category of, yes, but you're always going to say that about inspections. And I think it muddies our message. As a branch, as a union, we've always been relentlessly reasonable about things, and we have to be relentlessly reasonable about inspections are a part of the landscape, and we need to push on the right things. And I think if we do this, we're going to muddy those waters, and we're going to appear like we're actually just pushing against all inspection. I think it's much more important that actually the exec and the leadership here focus on, I think, Alistair, you said returning to business as usual. Actually, I don't ever want to go back to business as usual with Ofsted. I think we need to see the improvements in Ofsted, and we'd be better off using this as a tool for that. So I think, actually, Graham's amendment was quite useful in that sense.
Okay.
So I'll support that.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else who wishes to speak in support or against the amendment? So we have Simon supporting, or speaking, sorry.
Yeah, I'm speaking on behalf of Cheshire colleagues here. Yeah, we do feel that the fear of inspection is often worse than inspection itself, and a number of our schools in Cheshire do want to get inspection out of the way. They may be double RI, they may have not been inspected for 10 years. So I think Graham's proposal goes and gives that flexibility. But I'd also like to say they should also use 2022 data with extreme caution. That's my biggest worry. So there's those two things, impact of COVID and using 2022 data with extreme caution. And finally, to extend the curriculum transition arrangements for another 12 months. They're the things I think make sense because many schools want to get Ofsted over and done with.
Thank you. So this is still on the amendment. I'll just clarify the amendment again, and this is to insert, take full account of the impact and effects of the pandemic on schools that they can... I'll have to get Ian to read his handwriting. It's better than mine, but he's got to get his glasses now. Apologies.
That are impacting schools.
Oh, okay. Take full account of the impact and effects of the pandemic on the schools that they are impacting.
Schools that are not in a position to be inspected should be postponed.
Schools that are not in a position to be inspected should be postponed. So we're still debating that amendment. We'll get that perhaps typed up. Thank you.
Okay, Emily Prophet, Staffordshire Branch and National Executive. I'm going to be a bit controversial here. And I'm going to disagree with the amendment because I think it's a completely different motion. Whilst I agree that if inspections were to continue, there does need to be consideration of COVID and the opportunity to postpone, what we're calling for here isn't that. We're calling for complete postponement until 2023 when we can review our position. So this takes pressure off schools for a longer period of time so that they can take stock of where they are at, actually focus on educating our pupils rather than creating unnecessary workloads for their staff in preparation for Ofsted. So I believe, on behalf of Coventry Branch and the original proposers, that actually this amendment needs to be thrown out.
Okay. Thank you, Emily. Chris.
Good afternoon, conference. Chris Legg, Southwest Branch, and first time at this conference. I think that's right to say that at this point, is it? Yeah. Head teacher in Devon as well. I'm speaking against this amendment in the sense that, as we've heard all the way through this conference, the impact of COVID in our schools has been significant. March 2020, we all know how that impact felt, those people who are serving in schools. And 6 terms of disruption to our capacity to improve. When we look at what this proposal is suggesting, 2 terms of Ofsted being postponed until January 2023, I don't think is too much to ask for the sacrifice that everyone has given and the effort and energy everyone has put in. So I'm against the amendment, and thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on the amendment? Yep.
Chris Gaffney, Staffordshire Branch. I also speak against the amendment. The past 3 years have been the most difficult of my entire career. I've been a head teacher for 8 years now and in education for 15. And I don't remember a time that has been more challenging than the COVID pandemic. I would add that the time, since it has apparently now just disappeared and gone, I would add that this term, last term, was probably the hardest yet. The mental toll that it's taken on myself, on my school, on my children and my staff is immense. And I've spent a great deal of my time over the last 2 years, but particularly in the last 6 months, supporting my staff members' well-being as they have battled and fought, not just with COVID, but with the desperate desire to do the right things for our children. The pressure of Ofsted, and I sit fully within the Ofsted window now, and this extra layer of stress because of the spectre of Ofsted that exists over my school is preventing us from doing the great work that we know we need to do for my disadvantaged community. It's adding additional mental health stress to my members of staff. What I desperately need is the time and space to repair my community, to repair my staff team, and to create the conditions for excellence within my wonderful, wonderful school community. That's what I do best. A deep dive in music will not help me with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any more? Before we put it to a vote, Graham will have a right to reply, but I think we've got another speaker on the amendment. So there'll be speakers on the amendment, a right to reply, a vote on the amendment, and then back to the motion.
Thank you. Amy Lastman, Birmingham, West Midlands. The previous speaker said everything that I wanted to say, really, but on top of that, just to say that I inherited a school in COVID carrying an outstanding rating from 2009. So we're absolutely in that window. And I wouldn't be able to look my staff in the eye and tell them that I'd voted for this amendment. They will not work any harder. There's nothing that could make them work harder or care more. But the added pressure of this threat every day is having such an impact on their well-being, it's unacceptable. And if I could go back and say to them, we voted to stop Ofsted until January, they would be so much happier immediately. The only thing that would make them happy would be if we voted against any Ofsted at all. But I couldn't go back and say that I hadn't spoken against this amendment to protect their well-being. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't think we've got anyone else to speak. So therefore, Graham gets a right of reply, and then we'll put it to a vote whether we are for or to accept or reject the amendment. Thank you, Graham.
Just to reiterate that I represent members who would very much be sympathetic to the stress angle. I too know what that's about. I've had quite a few Ofsted inspections in my time. But I also will be speaking shortly about the effects of the pandemic as well in motion 16. So please understand that what I think we're trying to say here is we don't want to set up National Executive and our officers to fail because I really don't feel that we will get a postponement. I do feel, however, we do need to look after members who are feeling incredibly fatigued, and I still feel that the amendment does achieve that. It does result in us putting the points across that you would have us put across, but while also respecting that there are many, many people that we represent who do just want to get Ofsted over with and move on. So we're trying to represent both of those in this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. So now we're going to vote on the amendment, which you can see on your screen now. So it will be accept or reject. So could you raise your hand if you accept this amendment? Thank you. And could you raise your hand if you reject this amendment? So the amendment has been rejected overwhelmingly. What's the word? Yeah. Thank you. So now we're back to the motion 4 in its original format, please. Those on the screen. And we can continue the debate on the 2-minute mic. Thank you. And it will be 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, conference, and I will be quick. I do not want a bell. Although I am slightly nervous about what I'm going to say because I don't agree with the motion. Because I think that ship sailed. And Paul Whiteman talks about kicking down bricks. Sorry, I'm Deborah de Muscamp from the North East region, apologies. Paul Whiteman talks about kicking down bricks and bricks to make a difference. And I don't know if we're aware that the transitional statements that are in place in the inspection at the moment are due to come to an end in August 31st, end of term. So that means that leeway, and we are talking Ofsted leeway here, but the leeway that we were given on our curriculum intent and implementation and impact will disappear on the 1st of September, and I think that is wrong. And I think that's what we should be requesting, because I just do not think that they are going to stop inspection. So I feel, what is the point of asking for it? And I am not belittling or casting any doubt on everybody's views and emotions about Ofsted. They are exactly my own. But if we ask for a halt, I don't think that's the issue. So I think the motion should be about understanding, as Graham said, the impact, and just because Boris thinks COVID's over, it isn't, understanding that COVID still has an impact and requesting the transitional statements regarding curriculum are retained. Thank you, conference.
Thank you, Deborah. Keep coming up to the mic. Thank you.
I'll be quick, promise. All right, Don Wilkes from Cornwall. I was one of the people, Alistair, that Ofsted popped in for a wee chat in November 2020 when I had 545 children off and 33 staff off. But they still had a chat, and it was fine. But we're overdue with Ofsted quite significantly. It's my 3rd year on the job. They came in 2017, Ofsted. And I'm a bit confused, actually, because that whole debate, it's harder than University Challenge, this place. But I'm sort of torn between the two things, really, because I don't think I echo the previous colleagues' point of view that I don't think we're going to halt it or stop it, but I think we need that sympathy. I'm really tackling the fallout of behaviour. You know, 2 years of dysregulation of children at home, particularly disadvantaged children, and that could be an absolute nail in a coffin for an Ofsted inspection. So for me, that really frightens me, because we are dealing with it, but it's slowed down our journey to being exactly where I want it to be. So that's all I wanted to say, really. That, you know, I think we just need them to be more sensitive. And I know from a colleague in Cornwall who was absolutely crucified in December with an Ofsted inspection, who was absolutely distraught and thought about walking, and she's an amazing head teacher, because they came in and they completely disregarded any of the fallout from COVID.
Thank you very much. I'm going to say thank you. We're going to close the line so the people in the line speak, and if anyone's already made the point, and you don't need to make yours, then please use that facility as well. So thank you.
Okay. Nigel Atwood from West Midlands. I'm in debate with this one as well. Although I support the motion in one way, I'm 5 terms over now. We're due any time, and my staff really want Ofsted to come this term and just get it out of the way, because it's been breathing down their necks. And if we did delay until January 2023, there's 2 things I think there is a problem. One, it'll be, well, you're just there's no accountability, you don't want accountability. We'll get that thrown at us. And all we're doing then is delaying that pressure that they feel. If it was something we put forward, then I think it would need to go further and say that we would need to use that time to change from the high stakes pressure that we feel as leaders and staff. Because what our staff and what we never want to do is let everyone down. We don't want to let our families down, we don't want to let each other down. And there's a huge disconnect following on from one speaker who said about what Amanda Spielman has said. She's recent last couple of days talked about the fact that the claims that pressure from Ofsted, she denounces the fact that pressures from Ofsted is contributing to the exodus of head teachers and actually blames educational consultants who are doing it for their own gain. So I think that it's very difficult. I think what we should be asking for is that we do need accountability in our profession, as any profession, but it should be fair, equitable, not judgmental, but supportive, so that, because every school, every cohort and every community is different, and that was bringing us in line with the NEU and the NASUWT in replacing or reforming Ofsted. So I would suggest that maybe it needs to go further rather than just demanding the complete stop until January. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. If we could just keep the speakers rolling, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Julie Hogan from Bath, North East Somerset. I'm a life member, so I had a 33-year career in education, head teacher for 11 of those, and I retired in August 2021. I worked through the pandemic, so I experienced all the things that we've been hearing about over the last 2 days. And since I've retired, I've been talking to my friends and colleagues who are still working in school and listening to the pressures that they've been feeling. And yesterday we heard about the safeguarding issues and the stresses and the strains because children's services are so limited. And this morning we heard from my colleague Nikki talking about how she's feeling. I have to say, I think there is a crisis in of children's services and education. And I think trying to focus on learning and teaching when there are so many things that you're working on is really, really hard. I don't see Ofsted sharing compassion and humanity, and I am one of the head teachers that did retire early because of the ripples and the effects of Ofsted. So Amanda Spielman, I'm one of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Damien Knowles, also Bath and North East Somerset. I'll be brief. I've got the figures in front of me from yesterday at 4 o'clock. In the last 7 days, 1,560 people died from COVID. I think you won't see those figures anymore on the BBC News in the evening. They don't show those figures anymore because we are supposed to be moving on. And I totally understand that the argument about Ofsted may be a ship that has sailed in terms of actually achieving any difference. But if we stand for anything as a union, surely we stand for the well-being and rights of our members. And it strikes me that we should be taking a robust stance, even if we know that Ofsted and the government are intransigent and unlikely to yield to any demands that we make. What kind of union are we? Yes, we do want to be in the room, as Paul so emphatically said, and I totally agree with his point on that. But let's go into the room with a very robust stance and say, no, this is not right.
Thank you.
Hi there, Nick Whitehouse from Birmingham and West Midlands. I just wanted to build on what Amy from Birmingham was also describing. Much like her, I took on just at the start of the pandemic an previously outstanding school. And during the pandemic, my school and my staff have really been hitting home runs. They've been amazing and outstanding. I would give them outstanding. But I know that at inspection, I'm in the inspection frame over the next 6 months, the odds are really stacked against us in making and staying at outstanding. So I think that's a bit of a punishment for my staff, and there's no way that I could ever vote to get them inspected in the next few months. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Keep coming.
Louise Singleton, Ealing branch, and I thought I was going to be supported, but I'm up here on my own. So Dave and I are in the window. We are due for an inspection any time between now and 17th, although he says the 27th of June. We were inspected 5 years ago to the day, on the same day. I'm one of those schools who our colleague mentioned. I do not want the inspection delayed. My staff have worked incredibly hard. I am incredibly stressed. My staff are incredibly stressed. We just want it over and done with. However, I have the confidence that we have worked as hard as we possibly could and could not do anything more to support and make sure that the provision that we give for our children in our school is the best it possibly can, and I want to be able to showcase that whenever they come in. We are members of a union that work very effectively. We work effectively because we pick our battles and we make it absolutely effective for our members. I agree with the people who say that we should go in with a robust deadline. However, I think if we're going to be useful and productive for our members, we have to also be realistic. We are having to live with this, and there's no doubt that the tragedy and the deaths that we are still experiencing are there, and they're not going to go away. And for that reason, I also question the date, because we do not know what's going to be happening in January 2023. We may still be in this position, and I think kicking the can down the line is not what we want. So I will not be voting for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave Woods, Ealing Branch, and as my colleague Louise has said, we literally had our inspections on the exact same day. Our schools are a couple of 100 yards apart, and we shared the QA inspector who walked back and forth down the road. My staff would not thank me if I voted for this motion. We know our 5 years is up in the next couple of weeks, and we will be inspected. We are dead on our feet, we are exhausted, we are stressed, and we have had enough. But we know no matter how hard our union works, Ofsted will not stop inspection. They wanted to inspect us all through the pandemic. Now that, according to the government, the pandemic's over, they won't stop. So in this, I have to vote in a personal way for my own staff to get this damn thing out of the way, and then we can move on and we can actually recover as our school. And I won't be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, Alistair, you do have a right of reply. Are you? We're going to take it to a vote now. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alistair. Right then, so we will take this motion 4 to vote. Those in favour, would you raise your hands? And those against, would you raise your hands? I'm thinking we're going to need to engage the tellers. The tellers are going to be, we're going to have to go to tellers. So I shall be asking you again to raise your hand at the appropriate moment, and we will count. All the staff are looking very nervous. At least we know what we're doing now. Okay. It is. We've got 5 motions to do in half an hour. Although I can probably pinch, I might close the opening ceremony down by 10 minutes and try and do closing ceremony in 5 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So can I now ask you again, if you are in favour of this motion, raise your hand so you can be counted. And you know, yeah. I'm not going to count. I'm going to do it. I can't remember what. Have we counted? Keep your hands up for the moment. Okay, put your hands down. If you're voting against this motion, it's your turn to raise your hand. Can they put their hands down now, Magnus? I think you can lower your hands now. We have all the votes cast. If it's another card vote, I'm handing back to Tim.
I think Judith should have a go, actually.
Okay, so the votes for were 60 and those against were 81, so the motion is defeated. Thank you. Okay, conference, we are going to take a refreshment break now. I'm back in the hall at 3:45. Can I remind those, if you're interested in our equalities networks, I saw you typing, then you can go and have a chat and meet some people in Coalport Room 2 right now at 3:15. So go and say hello. So have a break and we'll see you back here at 3:45.